You won't believe what happened on a routine flight. A single cup of coffee, a moment of injustice, and one teenager's life turned upside down. This is a story of courage, prejudice, and a ripple effect that shook a $3.8 billion airline fund. Before you watch, like this video and share it, because the world needs to see how one act of injustice can spark massive change. Aiden thought this would be just another flight. He had no idea a scalding spill would expose racism, test his courage, and force the powerful to make a decision that could change everything. Stay with us as we take you through the shocking events that unfolded at 30,000 feet. The hum of the airplane was barely noticeable over the chatter of passengers, until a sudden scream shattered the calm. Aiden, just 16, was sitting quietly by the window, earbuds in, lost in his own world. But in the blink of an eye, everything changed. A steaming cup of coffee splashed across his lap, hot, scalding, and completely unexpected. The woman who had done it, flight attendant Chloe, didn't just glance at him, she glared. Her eyes burned with something Aiden couldn't understand, something he had never seen before. Passengers gasped, some whispered, but no one moved fast enough to stop what had just happened. Aiden's heart raced, a mix of fear, humiliation, and shock coursing through him. And yet, this wasn't just about a spilled drink, not even close. Because as Chloe stormed away, leaving Aiden drenched and stunned, no one realized that the ripple of this single moment would explode far beyond the cabin. Halfway across the country, Evelyn Grant, a billionaire investor managing a $3.8 billion fund, was about to make a decision that would shake an entire airline to its core. What did this teenage coffee spill have to do with millions of dollars? Why was one quiet flight about to make headlines around the world? Aiden sat frozen, staring at the coffee-stained seat, unaware that his life was about to intersect with forces he couldn't even imagine. One tiny mistake, one moment of cruelty, and suddenly the world was watching and waiting. Could a single act of injustice on a routine flight really trigger a chain reaction powerful enough to stop billions in motion? And more importantly, how would Aiden survive the storm that was coming? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you're going to witness a story of shocking betrayal, courage under fire, and a twist no one saw coming right at 30,000 feet. Aiden had always loved flying. Not the turbulence or the cramped seats. He loved the way the clouds looked from above, endless and soft, like a promise that the world was bigger than any problem on the ground. Sitting by the window, he'd press his forehead to the glass, imagining himself soaring beyond all the limitations the world tried to put on him. At 16, life at home was simple, but full. His mom worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. His little sister idolized him, and he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate life with both caution and hope. School was a mix of laughter with friends and moments of subtle reminders that not everyone saw him as equal, but he had learned to shrug most of it off. After all, Aiden had dreams bigger than whispers in the hallways. Today, he was traveling alone for the first time. A short flight across the country, just him, a backpack, and a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in months. He had saved up the money from tutoring, excited to visit a cousin and maybe even treat himself to a slice of freedom that only solo travel could give. His favorite book tucked under his arm, headphones snug. He was ready for a quiet, uneventful journey. But airplanes, like life, have a way of revealing the unexpected. Even as Aiden smiled at the flight attendant's polite greetings and the hum of the engines beneath him, there was a tension in the air he didn't notice yet. The subtle glances of some passengers, the curt nods, the way a uniformed attendant lingered just a second too long near his aisle. It was faint, almost invisible. Nothing that could ruin the moment. Not yet. Meanwhile, in the galley at the front of the plane, Chloe moved with efficiency, her uniform crisp, her demeanor controlled. She had worked thousands of flights, mastered the routine of smiles and service. But beneath that polished exterior was impatience, irritation at anything that slowed her down. And though Aiden had done nothing wrong, somehow, in ways he could never predict, he had already drawn her attention. As the plane lifted off, Aiden leaned back, closing his eyes and letting the world shrink beneath him. He felt untouchable, carried by the clouds and the hope that travel brought. But the world wasn't always as kind as it seemed, and soon the small, almost invisible cracks of prejudice would split the sky above him. It would start with a cup of coffee. The plane had barely leveled when the first ripple of chaos hit. Chloe, moving down the aisle with her cart, didn't notice Aiden at first. But then, an impatient glance, a huff, and a hand that knocked his backpack, almost spilling his carefully packed snacks. Aiden flinched, apologizing even though he hadn't done anything wrong. And then it happened. The coffee. Chloe's hands, supposed to serve and soothe, trembled with irritation, or maybe something sharper, and the cup tipped, the scalding liquid landing squarely on Aiden's lap. The searing burn wasn't just physical. It was humiliation, shock, and fear rolled into one instant. Aiden jerked upright, gasping, his eyes wide, looking around for someone, anyone, who might see. Some passengers murmured, a few raised eyebrows, but most looked away, unwilling to intervene. And Chloe? She didn't apologize. Not really. Just a sharp, dismissive, be careful, before she stormed back to the galley as if nothing had happened. The air around Aiden thickened. The laughter of a nearby group of teenagers turned into whispers, then pointed stares. Why him? Aiden wondered. He felt the heat of the coffee on his skin and the cold weight of invisibility pressing down on him. It wasn't the first time the world had made him small, but the sting was sharper this time. Alone, he tried to wring his jacket dry, trying to calm his shaking hands, but humiliation rarely comes alone. Soon, passengers started whispering louder, judging. Someone snapped a photo. Another commented loudly about kids causing trouble. Even the captain's voice over the intercom, cheerful and oblivious, felt like mockery. Aiden's heart pounded, his dreams of a quiet flight shattered. Meanwhile, back on the ground, the ripple of this moment was beginning to spread. News of the incident leaked. Someone's social media post captured the coffee spill. It didn't take long for it to go viral, and that's when Evelyn Grant, billionaire investor and head of a $3.8 billion fund, saw it. She had been watching the airline's practices closely, concerned about reputation, compliance, and public perception. But this was different. There was something unnerving about the way a simple act of cruelty could reveal an entire system of bias, negligence, and discrimination. As the flight continued, Aiden faced more subtle attacks. Chloe returned once, her words sharp and unnecessarily critical. "Are you sure you don't want a bag for your mess?" she said, smirking as if the burning liquid wasn't enough. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding at her, reinforcing her authority, while Aiden's small frame shrank further in his seat. Time stretched painfully. Every movement felt like a trial. The attendant served meals, announced routines, smiled at the wrong people, and ignored him. Each glance from Chloe cut deeper. Each whispered remark around the cabin stoked the fire of injustice. It wasn't just a coffee spill. It was a statement, a public humiliation, a reminder that some people's suffering was invisible unless they had the power to see it. And no one on this flight did. But Aiden wasn't entirely powerless. Behind the fear, frustration, and heat of the moment, a spark of determination grew. He began observing the world around him, the subtle biases, the moments when people looked away, the ways Chloe wielded authority like a weapon. Every insult, every dismissive glance, every whispered judgment was fueling something bigger. Then came the moment no one expected. A confrontation. A passenger, braver than the rest, spoke up. Chloe snapped, accusing, deflecting, her voice rising, her authority challenged. The cabin erupted in tension. Phones were out, videos were rolling. Aiden realized that something larger than himself was happening. The incident was no longer just personal. It was systemic, visible, undeniable. And at that exact moment, somewhere in the world, Evelyn Grant made a call that would shake the airline's foundations. Aiden didn't know it yet, but a decision was being made about billions of dollars, all triggered by this single scalding moment. The plane descended toward landing, and the tension didn't ease. Every step, every glare, every whisper hinted that the story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Aiden's ordeal had become a spark, a signal to the world that injustice, even in small moments, could not remain hidden. By the time the plane touched down, passengers had taken sides, some supportive, some indifferent, some hostile. Chloe's smirk remained, but it no longer held power in the same way. Aiden, exhausted but alert, knew that the fight wasn't in the skies anymore. It was down on the ground, in the world that had just been shown a glimpse of what bias could look like. And the question hung over everything. Could one teenager, powerless in the moment, ignite a chain reaction powerful enough to hold the richest people in the world accountable? Could justice really arrive mid-flight? Or was this only the beginning of something far larger? The terminal was buzzing, a sea of hurried travelers and rolling suitcases, but Aiden felt as if he were moving through a fog. Every step he took toward the gate felt heavier, the memory of the coffee scald still burning on his lap. Not just physically, but inside. Chloe had disappeared behind the curtains of the jet bridge, but her presence lingered like a shadow, sharp and mocking. Then it began. The whispers started again, this time not just on the plane. Passengers who had watched the viral clips on social media recognized him. Some offered sympathetic glances, others barely concealed smirks. And somewhere in the mix, there were those who whispered ugly words he could almost hear, assuming he couldn't. The world had already formed an opinion about him before he even stepped off the plane. Aiden's palms were clammy as he walked, trying to ignore the stares, trying to hold on to the composure that had carried him through the flight. But nothing could prepare him for what happened next. Chloe appeared at the gate, not as an attendant this time, but in front of the terminal crowd, her eyes narrowing the second she saw him. "You've caused enough trouble," she said, loud enough for nearby travelers to hear. Her voice dripped with authority, entitlement, and disdain. Aiden froze, the weight of injustice pressing down. People stopped in their tracks to watch. Some filmed, some whispered, and some simply turned away. He could feel the anger rising, a tight, almost suffocating energy that he'd carried quietly for years, amplified in this one moment. This wasn't just about coffee. This wasn't just about Chloe. This was about every glance that had made him feel small, every assumption that had questioned his worth, every invisible barrier stacked against him. For a heartbeat, he considered fleeing. It would be easier, safer, less humiliating, but something inside him shifted. A spark, tiny but fierce, ignited in his chest. No longer a scared teenager, he stood tall. "You think this is about me?" he said, his voice trembling but growing steadier with every word. "This isn't just my fight. This is about every time someone like me has been ignored, pushed aside, or humiliated. You may have spilled that coffee, but it's the system that spilled it over generations. And I'm not walking away." The terminal went silent. Travelers paused, staring. Even Chloe blinked, taken aback by the unexpected courage radiating from someone she assumed was powerless. Her carefully curated armor of authority faltered, revealing the cracks beneath. At that exact moment, somewhere else, Evelyn Grant's team had completed a live briefing. Footage from the flight, combined with social media traction, had reached her office. Within minutes, her decision was finalized, a complete freeze on the $3.8 billion fund backing the airline. The move sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Investors panicked, executives scrambled, and news networks lit up with speculation. Back in the terminal, Aiden could feel the world tilting. Phones raised around him captured his defiance, his fear, and the raw human dignity that Chloe had tried, and failed, to strip away. His heart pounded, adrenaline and fear mixing with an unfamiliar sense of power. For the first time in the day, he wasn't the victim. He was the spark, the catalyst, but Chloe wasn't finished. She stepped closer, voice sharp, almost venomous. "You'll regret this," she said. But this time, her words bounced off an armor built from years of resilience, years of surviving unfairness, and the fire of courage that had suddenly taken hold. Aiden didn't flinch. He looked her in the eye, steady and unwavering. "No, you'll regret underestimating me," he said. As airport security began approaching, the scene grew chaotic. Passengers were recording every moment, streaming clips live, hashtags forming instantly online. The story was no longer confined to one flight. It had become a symbol. Every insult, every act of prejudice, every moment of public humiliation had culminated here. And now, it was about to make history. And then, in a twist no one saw coming, a reporter from a major news network arrived at the terminal filming live. Evelyn's decision had already leaked. The airline stock was dropping. Social media was erupting. Headlines were preparing themselves even as Aiden stood frozen, exhausted, and yet unbroken. In that instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. Aiden's small frame, once overlooked and dismissed, had become the focal point of a movement he didn't ask for, but couldn't turn away from. Every fear, every tear, every moment of injustice flashed behind his eyes, converging into a single realization. This fight was bigger than him, and it had only just begun. The terminal lights flickered over Chloe's stunned expression, the cameras, the phones, the murmurs of bystanders, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended. Then came the final thought that would haunt and inspire everyone watching. Could a single act of courage from a 16-year-old change the course of a billion-dollar empire? Or was this just the first spark in a storm that had only just begun? The chaos that erupted in the terminal did not end when Aiden finally stepped away from Chloe. The world had already taken notice. By the time he reached the curb outside the airport, flashing cameras, murmurs of passengers, and the distant hum of helicopters covering the story had transformed what he had endured into something much bigger, a symbol. News outlets everywhere picked up the footage. The video of Chloe spilling coffee, the tense confrontation in the terminal, and Aiden's defiant words traveled faster than any social media algorithm could calculate. Hashtags flooded timelines. Justice for Aiden, airline accountability. The courage at 16. People shared it with captions like, "This is why we cannot stay silent, and every act of prejudice has consequences." Aiden's face, once just a teenage boy on a flight, now became the lens through which millions saw the everyday injustices so many endured. Meanwhile, Evelyn Grant's $3.8 billion fund freeze sent shockwaves through the airline industry. Executives scrambled, public relations teams mobilized, and investors panicked as the airline's reputation teetered on the edge of collapse. No amount of spin could undo the footage that had gone viral, or the clear evidence of bias and harassment captured in the terminal. Within hours, Evelyn's decision had forced the airline to confront not only Chloe's actions but a broader culture that allowed these incidents to occur. Inside the airline, disciplinary action was swift and unavoidable. Chloe was suspended pending investigation. Her career, built over years of careful maneuvering, now hung by a thread. But more importantly, the airline initiated company-wide sensitivity training, re-evaluated hiring practices, and created a reporting system to ensure that employees like Aiden would never feel invisible or powerless again. The consequences were real, systemic, and lasting. For Aiden, the immediate aftermath was overwhelming. Interviews, phone calls, and messages poured in from strangers across the country. Some offered support, some criticized, some sought advice on how to fight similar injustices in their own lives. He was suddenly thrust into a role he hadn't asked for, a symbol of courage, resilience, and the fight against prejudice. For a brief moment, the weight of the world pressed down on him, and he questioned whether he was ready to carry it. But as he looked at the messages of encouragement from people who had faced similar experiences, he realized he wasn't alone. Family became his anchor. His mother, who had always worked tirelessly to shield him from harm, now hugged him with tears in her eyes. "You did something they'll never forget," she whispered. His younger sister, inspired by her brother's bravery, began speaking up in her own school, refusing to tolerate bullying or prejudice. In their home, the incident became a lesson in courage, integrity, and the power of standing up for what's right. The broader societal impact was profound. Across social media, people began sharing their own experiences of racism and discrimination, using Aiden's story as a rallying point. Community groups organized forums, schools initiated programs to teach empathy and inclusion, and corporations reevaluated workplace policies to prevent similar acts of injustice. The ripple effect was unmistakable. A single act of cruelty had sparked a conversation that no one could ignore. And yet, the story wasn't just about anger or outrage. It was about transformation. Chloe too faced a reckoning that went beyond suspension. Interviews revealed a mix of fear, defensiveness, and ultimately reflection. She was forced to confront not only the consequences of her actions, but the biases she carried unconsciously. For some, this was too little, too late. But for the larger public, it underscored an uncomfortable truth, that prejudice isn't always overt, but its effects are devastatingly real. For Aiden, the turning point wasn't just surviving the incident, it was the decision to use his experience for good. He began speaking at schools, community centers, and youth programs about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of standing up against injustice. His story became a blueprint for courage, that even in the most powerless moments, dignity and integrity could ignite change. Evelyn Grant, the billionaire investor who had first intervened, became a champion for systemic reform in the airline industry. She funded scholarships for underrepresented youth, initiated diversity programs in corporate settings, and publicly advocated for policies that held companies accountable for both their employees' actions and organizational culture. Her decisive action reminded the world that privilege carries responsibility, and that when courage and accountability intersect, real change can happen. Ultimately, the story reached a conclusion that was as much about hope as it was about justice. Aiden had faced humiliation, discrimination, and a world that had tried to minimize him, but he emerged stronger. Chloe faced consequences she could not avoid. The airline was forced to confront systemic issues it had ignored for years. And society, however briefly, was reminded that every act of prejudice has a cost, and every act of courage has the power to inspire transformation. The final lesson of Aiden's ordeal is clear and unflinching. Racism destroys families, prejudice weakens communities, and unchecked cruelty corrodes the world around us. But courage, even from a single teenager, can illuminate the darkness, hold the powerful accountable, and spark healing where none seemed possible. As the cameras finally turned away and the terminal emptied, Aiden walked out into the sunlight, scarred but unbroken, a living testament to resilience. The world had watched him burn, figuratively and literally, but it had also watched him rise. And that, perhaps, was the most important victory of all, that even in the face of hate, dignity and courage endure. Because sometimes, one small act, standing up, speaking out, refusing to be invisible, is all it takes to change everything.